The fluorescent lights of Murphy's diner cast their familiar harsh glow across the checkered linoleum floor as Jessica Chen tied her apron strings for what felt like the 1,000th time. At 28, she had been working the night shift at this downtown Seattle establishment for nearly 2 years, serving coffee that was too strong and pie that was surprisingly good to an eclectic mix of taxi drivers, insomniacs, and the occasional group of well-dressed patrons stumbling in after expensive dinners elsewhere. Tonight felt different somehow, though Jessica couldn't quite put her finger on why. Maybe it was the way the October rain hammered against the windows with unusual intensity, or perhaps it was the strange energy that seemed to permeate the air before something significant happened. She had learned to trust these instincts during her previous life, though that felt like a world away now. The dinner rush had been typical, a steady stream of regulars who knew her by name and appreciated her quick smile and efficient service. Old George had come in for his usual coffee and slice of apple pie, sharing stories about his late wife while Jessica refilled his cup without being asked. The Rodriguez family had stopped by after their son's soccer game, the kids still buzzing with excitement over their 3-2 victory. These were the interactions that made the long hours worthwhile, the genuine human connections that reminded Jessica why she had chosen this simple life. It was just past 10:30 when the black Mercedes pulled up outside, its sleek form looking entirely out of place among the pickup trucks and economy cars that usually occupied Murphy's parking lot. Jessica watched through the rain-streaked window as two figures emerged from the luxury vehicle, a man in what appeared to be a custom-tailored suit despite the late hour, and a woman draped in fur despite the mild Seattle autumn. They paused outside the diner's entrance, the woman gesturing dismissively at the modest establishment, while the man checked his expensive watch with obvious impatience. Jessica could see them through the glass, their body language screaming reluctance and disdain. Finally, they pushed through the door, bringing with them the scent of expensive perfume and an air of superiority that seemed to lower the temperature in the room. Jessica approached their table with her standard warm smile and notepad ready. "Good evening. Welcome to Murphy's. Can I start you folks off with some coffee?" The woman, who appeared to be in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that probably cost more than Jessica's monthly rent, looked up with barely concealed disgust. "Coffee? From this place? I highly doubt it meets our standards." Her voice carried the crisp accent of old money and private schools. "What we need is directions to a decent hotel. Our driver seems to have gotten us completely lost." The man, slightly older with silver temples and the soft look of someone who had never missed a meal, barely glanced at Jessica. "The GPS died, and my phone has no signal in this godforsaken area. Just tell us how to get to the Four Seasons, and we'll be on our way." Jessica maintained her professional composure despite the dismissive tone. "I'd be happy to help with directions, but the Four Seasons is about 40 minutes from here in good weather. With this storm, you're looking at over an hour. Are you sure you wouldn't like to wait it out? Maybe some hot soup to warm you up?" The woman laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Soup? From a place like this?" She gestured around the diner with a manicured hand adorned with rings that caught the fluorescent light. "Darling, look at this waitress. Look at where we are. Do you honestly think anything edible could come from this kitchen?" Her husband Jessica assumed they were married based on their matching wedding rings, and synchronized condescension chuckled along. "Margaret's right. This is exactly the kind of place where people end up when they've made poor life choices." He looked directly at Jessica now, his eyes cold and appraising. "No offense, dear, but serving coffee in a dump like this at your age? What went wrong? Drugs, drinking, failed marriage?" The casual cruelty of the question hit Jessica like a physical blow. She felt her cheeks burn, but her voice remained steady. "I'm sorry you feel that way about our establishment. The offer for directions still stands, but I should mention that the storm has caused several road closures between here and downtown. The police are recommending that people avoid unnecessary travel." Margaret stood up abruptly, her fur coat rustling with indignation. "This is ridiculous, Charles. I'm not spending another minute in this pathetic place with this pathetic woman. We'll take our chances with the weather." Charles pulled out his wallet and threw a $20 bill on the table with theatrical disdain. "For your trouble, sweetheart. Maybe it'll help you buy some self-respect." They swept toward the door, Margaret's voice carrying back across the diner. "Can you imagine ending up like that? Working in a place like this? I'd rather die." The door slammed behind them, leaving Jessica standing alone beside their abandoned table. The $20 bill sat there like an insult, mocking her with its casual dismissal of her dignity. She could feel the eyes of the other customers on her. Old George looked furious. The Rodriguez family appeared shocked, and even Tony the cook had emerged from the kitchen with a concerned expression. "You okay, Jess?" Tony asked, his Brooklyn accent thick with indignation. Those people were completely out of line. Jessica forced a smile and began clearing the untouched water glasses from the table. "I'm fine, Tony." "Really? Some people just have bad days." But even as she said it, she could feel something stirring inside her chest, not anger, exactly, but a familiar sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in a very long time. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:47 p.m. The Mercedes was pulling out of the parking lot, its taillights disappearing into the storm. Jessica felt an odd premonition, the same instinct that had served her so well during her 8 years in the army, the same sixth sense that had kept her squad alive in Afghanistan and earned her 3 commendations for bravery under fire. 45 minutes later, as Jessica was refilling the coffee station, the emergency scanner that Tony kept in the kitchen crackled to life. "All units, we have a vehicle accident on Highway 18, approximately 2 miles south of the Murphy's Diner exit. Black Mercedes sedan, 2 occupants trapped, vehicle partially submerged in flood water. EMT response delayed due to weather conditions." Jessica's blood ran cold. Highway 18 was the route she had mentally mapped out for the rude couple, the fastest way to downtown Seattle. Without hesitation, she untied her apron and grabbed her jacket from behind the counter. "Tony, I need to go," she called to the kitchen. "Go? Where? Your shift doesn't end until." "There's been an accident. I think it might be those people who were just here." Jessica was already moving toward the door, muscle memory taking over as her mind shifted into the focused clarity that had made her one of the most decorated combat medics in her unit. The storm was even worse outside than it had appeared from inside the diner's warm interior. Rain lashed Jessica's face as she ran toward her beat-up Honda Civic, the wind nearly knocking her off balance. She had maintained her vehicle meticulously despite its age-old habits from the military, and it started immediately despite the weather. The drive to the accident site took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Jessica's hands were steady on the wheel, but her mind was racing through medical protocols she hadn't used in civilian life. When she arrived at the scene, she could see why the emergency response was delayed. The road was partially flooded, and the Mercedes had skidded off the asphalt into a rapidly rising creek that ran parallel to the highway. The car was tilted at a dangerous angle, its front end submerged, water already reaching the windows. Jessica could see 2 figures inside, apparently unconscious. Without hesitation, she kicked off her shoes and waded into the cold, fast-moving water. The current was stronger than she had anticipated, but Jessica had trained in far worse conditions. She reached the car and tried the doors locked, and the electrical system had clearly failed. The water was rising quickly, already reaching the door handles. In the passenger seat, Margaret was slumped forward, blood visible on her forehead. Charles appeared to be unconscious but breathing in the driver's seat. Jessica didn't hesitate. She grabbed a rock from the creek bed and smashed the rear window, ignoring the cuts as broken glass sliced her hands. The water rushing into the car would make her job harder, but it also meant she could access the passengers more easily. Margaret first, she appeared to be in worse condition. Jessica had to hold her breath and duck underwater to unbuckle the woman's seatbelt, her fingers working by feel in the murky water. Margaret was heavier than expected, dead weight in Jessica's arms, but 8 years of carrying wounded soldiers had prepared her for this. She managed to pull the unconscious woman through the broken window and get her to shore, where she quickly checked her vitals. Pulse weak but steady. Breathing shallow but consistent. Probable concussion, possible internal injuries. Jessica performed a rapid field assessment, her hands moving with practiced efficiency even as rain continued to pour down on them both. Margaret's expensive fur coat was ruined, matted with mud and blood, but she was alive. Going back for Charles was harder. The water had risen significantly, and the car was now almost completely submerged. Jessica had to take a deep breath and dive down to reach him, working entirely by touch to free him from his seatbelt and airbag. He was larger than his wife, and Jessica had to make 3 attempts before she could maneuver him through the broken window. By the time she got Charles to shore, she could hear sirens in the distance. Her hands were shaking from cold and adrenaline, but she continued performing CPR on Charles, who had stopped breathing during the extraction. 1 minute of chest compressions, then rescue breathing, then back to compressions. She lost track of time, focused entirely on the rhythm that might keep him alive. "Come on," she whispered between compressions. "Come on, Charles. Don't you dare die on me. Not after everything you said about poor life choices." Finally, Charles gasped and coughed up water, his eyes fluttering open. He looked confused and disoriented, but he was breathing on his own. Jessica sat back on her heels, exhausted but triumphant, as the first emergency vehicles finally arrived on the scene. The next few hours passed in a blur of paramedics, police reports, and hospital visits. Jessica rode in the ambulance with Margaret and Charles, continuing to monitor their conditions and providing the EMT with detailed information about their injuries and the circumstances of the rescue. Both victims were stable by the time they reached Harborview Medical Center, though Charles would need surgery for internal injuries and Margaret had a severe concussion. It wasn't until Jessica was sitting in the hospital waiting room, her clothes still damp and her hands bandaged from the broken glass, that she realized someone was filming her. A local news crew had arrived, alerted by police scanners about the dramatic rescue. "Ma'am, I'm Sarah Collins from Channel 7 News. We understand you pulled 2 people from a submerged vehicle tonight. Can you tell us what happened?" Jessica looked up, suddenly aware of how she must appear, her waitress uniform torn and muddy, her hair stringy from the rain, exhaustion written across her face. "I just did what anyone would have done. I saw people in trouble, and I helped. But our sources tell us this wasn't just anyone helping. You're a decorated combat veteran, aren't you? Army medic. Served 3 tours in Afghanistan." Jessica had hoped her military service wouldn't come up. She had deliberately chosen a quiet life after her discharge, wanting to leave that chapter behind. That was a long time ago. Tonight I was just a waitress who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Sergeant Chen, you received the Bronze Star for valor after saving 6 members of your unit during an insurgent attack in Kandahar. You were personally commended by your commanding officer for extraordinary heroism under fire. And now you've saved 2 more lives. How does it feel to be a hero again? Jessica stood up, uncomfortable with the attention. I'm not a hero. Heroes are the people I served with who didn't make it home. I'm just someone who knows basic first aid. She started to walk away, but the reporter followed. The couple you saved tonight, do you know who they are? Jessica paused. No, should I? Charles and Margaret Westbrook. He's the CEO of Westbrook Financial, one of the largest investment firms in the Pacific Northwest. She's on the board of 3 major charities. They're worth an estimated $40 million. Jessica thought about this information, remembering their cruel words from just hours earlier. I didn't save them because of who they are or what they're worth. I saved them because they're human beings who needed help. The reporter's eyes lit up with the kind of expression that suggested she sensed a bigger story. Sergeant Chen, can you tell us about your interaction with the Westbrooks earlier this evening? I'm sorry, I need to go. My shift at the diner ended hours ago, and people will be worried. But it was too late. The story had already taken on a life of its own. The next evening, Jessica was back at Murphy's Diner, trying to pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The story had run on the morning news, then been picked up by national outlets. Waitress turned war hero saves couple who mocked her hours earlier had become a viral sensation, shared thousands of times across social media platforms. Jessica had turned off her phone after the 15th interview request, but she couldn't escape the story entirely. Customers had been coming into the diner all day, not for the food but to meet the hero waitress. She had served coffee to reporters, curiosity seekers, and veterans who wanted to shake her hand and share their own stories. At 8 p.m., just as Jessica was hoping for a quiet end to her shift, a black sedan pulled up outside the diner. This time it wasn't a Mercedes, but rather a modest Honda Accord. Charles Westbrook stepped out, moving carefully due to his injuries, followed by Margaret, who had her arm in a sling and wore simple clothes instead of her usual finery. The diner fell silent as they entered. Jessica approached their table, the same table they had occupied the night before, with her notepad ready. "Good evening," she said simply. "Can I get you some coffee?" Charles looked up at her, and Jessica was surprised to see tears in his eyes. "Jessica, Sergeant Chen Lai." "We." He struggled to find words, his usual arrogance completely absent. Margaret reached across the table and gently took Jessica's bandaged hand. "We came to apologize. And to thank you. The doctor said another 10 minutes in that water, and we both would have died. And to make amends," Charles added quickly. "What we said to you last night was inexcusable. We judged you based on where you worked instead of who you are. We had no idea that we were speaking to someone who had served our country with such distinction." Jessica set down her notepad and slid into the booth across from them. "Mr. and Mrs. Westbrook, you don't need to apologize because of my military service. You need to apologize because your behavior was wrong, regardless of my background. Every person deserves to be treated with basic human dignity." Margaret nodded, fresh tears starting to fall. "You're absolutely right. We've spent so much time in our bubble of privilege that we forgot what it means to see people as individuals rather than stereotypes. Watching the news coverage, learning about your service record, your sacrifices. It made us realize how small and petty we've become." Charles leaned forward earnestly. "We want to make this right. My company has decided to establish a scholarship fund for veterans transitioning to civilian careers. We're calling it the Jessica Chen Foundation for Military Heroes." Jessica held up a hand. That's very generous, but I don't need my name on anything. If you want to help veterans, that's wonderful. But do it because it's the right thing to do, not because you feel guilty about how you treated one waitress. It's not guilt, Margaret said softly. It's respect. And recognition that we met a genuine hero and almost missed it entirely because we're shallow people who judge others by their circumstances rather than their character. Over the next hour, the three of them talked in a way that would have been impossible the night before. Charles and Margaret shared stories about their privileged upbringing and how it had insulated them from real hardship. Jessica talked about her transition from military to civilian life. Her choice to work at the diner because she enjoyed the simple human connections it offered. I could have used my military connections to get a corporate job, Jessica explained. But after years of life and death situations, there's something peaceful about serving coffee and pie to people who just want a warm meal and friendly conversation. Success isn't always about money or status. Sometimes it's about finding meaning in simple acts of service.